Welcome to Quiet Story Nights, a place where history whispers and stories gently carry you into sleep. Get comfortable, relax, and let tonight's story begin. Close your eyes, take a slow breath in, and let it out even more slowly than you took it in. Feel the weight of your body, the surface beneath you solid and real, your shoulders dropping, your hands open and still. The small tensions of the day releasing, one by one, like knots slowly loosening. Let everything go, the tasks undone, the conversations replaying, the plans and worries and small anxieties that fill the waking mind. Let them drift downstream, carried away by the current of the night. Tonight, we are going to tell the biggest story ever told. Not the story of a civilization or a species or even a planet, the story of everything. Of time itself, from its very first moment to this one, this precise, warm, quiet moment in which you are lying here, breathing slowly on the edge of sleep. The story begins in a place that had no place, at a moment that had no before, in a darkness that was not dark because there was no light yet to make darkness meaningful. It begins with nothing, and from that nothing, in a fraction of a second so small that no number we use in daily life can describe it, everything that exists burst into being. Every galaxy, every star, every planet, every ocean and mountain and living cell and thought and dream and moment of beauty and moment of pain that has ever existed, anywhere in the universe. All of it, from nothing, in less time than it takes to blink. This is the story of how that happened, how the universe went from nothing to everything, how the stars were born and died and were born again, how one ordinary star on the outer edge of one ordinary galaxy gathered a family of planets around itself. How one of those planets, at exactly the right distance, with exactly the right chemistry, caught fire with life. How set life överliljens becoming, produced creatures who could look up at the stars and ask where they came from. How those creatures eventually lay down in the dark and listened to someone tell them the story of everything. That is you, right now. At the end of 14 billion years of universe, here you are. The cosmos, become conscious of itself, settling in for sleep. Breathe slowly, let the darkness be friendly. And let me take you all the way back to the very beginning. The first seconds, nothing. Before the universe, there was nothing. I need you to sit with that for a moment. Not nothing in the way we usually mean the word. Not an empty room, not a dark sky, not the silence after a sound has ended. Those things are all something. They have space and time around them. They exist within a framework. This nothing was different. There was no space. There was no time. There was no framework. There was no darkness, because darkness requires somewhere to be dark. There was no silence, because silence requires somewhere to be silent in. There was simply nothing, the complete absolute, total absence of anything whatsoever. And then, in a moment that cannot be described as a moment, because moments require time, and time did not yet exist, something happened. Physicists call it the Big Bang, though the name is misleading. It was not an explosion in the conventional sense. There was no space for an explosion to expand into. It was more like the sudden appearance of space itself, along with everything in it from a state of infinite density and temperature. The universe did not begin in a place. It began as a place. Space itself came into existence. Time itself came into existence. And in the first instant of their existence, they were filled with a seething, unimaginably hot, unimaginably dense plasma of energy and matter so compressed that the distinction between energy and matter had not yet fully emerged. In the first second of the universe's existence, more happened than in any subsequent period of comparable duration. In the first fraction of a second, in a period physicists call inflation, lasting perhaps 10 to the power of minus 32 seconds, the universe expanded faster than the speed of light. Not matter moving through space, but space itself expanding. The universe grew from something smaller than a proton to something the size of a grapefruit in that inconceivable instant. Then inflation ended. The expansion slowed, though it never stopped. And the energy of inflation converted into the first particles of matter and antimatter. The universe was 1 second old. It was 1 billion degrees hot. It was filled with quarks and electrons and neutrinos and photons, all colliding and annihilating and creating each other in a chaos of energy so total that it makes every subsequent event in cosmic history look calm. The first 3 minutes. In the first 3 minutes of the universe's existence, the fate of everything was decided. Not everything that would happen. The stars were billions of years away, and life was further still. But the proportions, the recipe, the fundamental ingredients from which everything else would eventually be made. In the first 3 minutes, protons and neutrons, the building blocks of atomic nuclei, were forging themselves from the quarks that inflation had produced. And those protons and neutrons were combining, briefly and chaotically, into the first atomic nuclei. Mostly hydrogen. 1 proton, the simplest possible nucleus, needing no neutron partner. The most abundant element in the universe, then and now approximately 75% of all ordinary matter. And helium. 2 protons and 2 neutrons, the second simplest nucleus, approximately 24% of all ordinary matter. And traces, tiny, almost vanishingly small traces of lithium and a few other light elements. That is the recipe the first 3 minutes produced. Hydrogen and helium with a whisper of lithium. Everything else carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, iron, calcium, silicon. Every element that makes planets and oceans and living things did not exist yet. It would have to be made in the only factories capable of making it. The stars. But the stars were still hundreds of millions of years away. First, the universe had to cool, and cooling took time. A very, very long time. The long darkness? After the first 3 minutes, the universe entered a period that cosmologists call, with characteristic scientific poetry, the Dark Ages. It lasted approximately 380 million years. For 380 million years, there were no stars, no galaxies, no light of any kind that could travel freely through the universe. Only a dense, hot fog of hydrogen and helium plasma, matter and energy so thoroughly mixed that light could not travel more than a tiny distance before being absorbed and re-emitted. The universe was opaque. If you had been there, which you could not have been, because there was no air to be in, no oxygen to breathe, no temperature compatible with life, you would have seen nothing. Only the faint, dull glow of the plasma itself, cooling degree by degree as the universe expanded. It was the longest night in the history of everything. And then, very slowly, over millions of years, gravity began to do its work. The hydrogen and helium were not perfectly evenly distributed. Tiny quantum fluctuations from the inflationary period had left the distribution of matter microscopically uneven, some regions very slightly denser than others. And gravity, patient and relentless, began to amplify those tiny differences. Denser regions attracted more matter. As they attracted more matter, they became denser still. Their gravity grew. They attracted more matter. The process compounded, slowly, over millions of years until the first structures began to emerge from the fog. Not stars yet. First, filaments and sheets and knots of denser matter, the large-scale structure of the universe. The cosmic web of dark matter and gas that would eventually host the galaxies. And within those knots, within those regions of greatest density, something was beginning to happen. Something that would change everything. The gas was collapsing, pulled by its own gravity into a tighter and tighter ball, heating as it compressed. Heating and heating and heating, until at the very center of the collapse, the temperature reached 10 million degrees. And nuclear fusion ignited. The first star was born. Its light, the first light in the universe since the Big Bang's afterglow faded, streamed out into the darkness. And the Dark Ages ended. The first stars? The first stars were nothing like the sun. They were enormous. Hundreds of times the mass of the sun, perhaps more. They burned with an intensity that no star alive today can match, so hot, so bright. So furiously energetic that they tore apart the hydrogen gas around them and flooded the universe with ultraviolet radiation. And they died young. A massive star burns through its fuel with such profligacy that it can last only a few million years. A star like our sun, modest and careful, can burn for 10 billion years. The first stars were dead before our sun had even been thought of by the universe. But in their brief, brilliant lives, they made something new. Nuclear fusion, the process that powers a star, that fuses lighter nuclei into heavier ones, releasing the energy that makes the star shine, does not just convert hydrogen into helium. In the hot cores of massive stars, the process continues. Helium fuses into carbon, Carbon fuses into oxygen, oxygen into neon, neon into magnesium, magnesium into silicon, silicon into iron. Iron is where the chain ends. Iron fusion absorbs energy rather than releasing it. When a massive star's core fills with iron, the energy source that has been holding it up against the crushing weight of its own gravity simply stops. And in a fraction of a second, the core collapses. The result is a supernova. The outer layers of the star, falling inward at a quarter of the speed of light, rebound off the suddenly rigid core and are blasted outward in an explosion so powerful that for a brief period, the dying star outshines the entire galaxy it lives in. And in that explosion, in the tremendous energies of the shockwave, elements heavier than iron are forged: gold, silver, uranium, platinum, the elements that no stellar core can make in normal. Fusion, only the violence of a supernova has enough energy to create them. The first stars exploded, and in exploding, they seeded the universe with everything that life would eventually need. The carbon in your body, the oxygen in your breath, the iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones. All of it was made in the cores and deaths of stars that lived and died billions of years before the sun was born. You are made of stardust. This is not a metaphor. It is a precise, literal, scientific fact. The birth of the Milky Way. From the first stars, the universe built its second generation, and its third, and its fourth. Each generation of stars enriched the surrounding gas with heavier elements, the carbon and oxygen and silicon and iron that earlier stars had made in their cores and scattered in their deaths. Each generation of stars was therefore slightly different from the last, slightly more enriched with the elements that would eventually make planets and oceans and life. The galaxies were forming too. Gravity was pulling the vast filaments of matter into flattened, spinning disks and elliptical clouds of billions of stars. The Milky Way, our galaxy, was assembling itself from smaller galaxies merging and from gas falling inward, and from generations of stars being born and dying across its slowly forming disk. The Milky Way is approximately 13.6 billion years old, nearly as old as the universe itself. It contains somewhere between 100 billion and 400 billion stars. It is about 100,000 light years across. The Sun sits about 26,000 light years from the center, on the inner edge of one of the galaxy's spiral arms, the Orion Arm, an ordinary location in an ordinary galaxy. Nothing special about it by cosmic standards, which is precisely what makes what happened here so extraordinary. About 4.6 billion years ago, in a quiet corner of the Milky Way's outer disk, a cloud of gas and dust enriched by 4 generations of stellar nucleosynthesis, carrying within it the ashes of stars that had lived and died over 9 billion years, began to collapse. What triggered the collapse is not certain. Perhaps the shockwave from a nearby supernova. Perhaps simply the slow, patient accumulation of enough gas in one place that gravity could take hold. Whatever the trigger, the collapse began. And at the center of the collapsing cloud, a new star was beginning to form. Our sun. The birth of the sun. The sun formed the same way all stars form. A cloud of gas and dust collapses under its own gravity. As it collapses, IT spins faster, the same reason a spinning figure skater speeds up when she pulls her arms in. The conservation of angular momentum. The spinning cloud flattens into a disk. IT sind denser and hotter. Eventually, the temperature at the center reaches 10 million degrees. And fusion ignites. The sun turned on approximately 4.6 billion years ago. When it did, the leftover material, the gas and dust that had not fallen into the forming sun, was still swirling around it in a flat disk. And in that disk, something was happening. The dust particles in the disk were colliding, sticking together, growing. Slowly at first, dust grains becoming pebbles, pebbles becoming boulders, boulders becoming planetesimals, small bodies kilometers across, with enough gravity to attract more material. Then the planetesimals were colliding with each other, sometimes catastrophically, sometimes building each other into larger bodies. The process was violent and chaotic. The inner solar system, in its first 100 million years, was a shooting gallery of colliding rocks and half-formed worlds. Rocky bodies were constantly smashing into each other, growing or shattering or being flung onto new orbits by the gravitational influence of Jupiter, already forming. In the outer solar system, already large enough to throw its weight around. Out of this chaos, 4 rocky planets emerged: Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, the inner planets. Close enough to the sun that the solar wind had blown away most of their gas and left them with solid rocky surfaces. And one of third out. At a distance of approximately 150 million kilometers from the sun was about to become the most interesting planet in the solar system. The making of Earth. The Earth is approximately 4.5 billion years old. It formed quickly, by cosmic standards, in the first 10 to 20 million years after the sun ignited. It began as a ball of rock, gradually growing larger as it swept up material along its orbit. Its surface molten from the heat of constant impact and from the decay of radioactive elements trapped inside it. In its first 100 million years, Earth was not a welcoming place. Its surface was a global ocean of molten rock, magma as far as the eye could see, glowing red and orange under a sky thick with volcanic gases. The sun was younger and slightly dimmer than it is today. The moon did not yet exist. And then, approximately 4.5 billion years ago, something hit the Earth. Not a small rock, a planet. A body approximately the size of Mars, which is itself more than half the size of Earth, struck the young Earth in a collision so violent that both bodies were largely melted and vaporized by the impact. The object, which planetary scientists have named Theia, may have been forming in the same orbit as Earth, gradually catching up. The collision was catastrophic. Debris, a vast ring of vaporized rock, was flung into orbit around the Earth, and from that debris ring, within perhaps 1,000 years, the moon assembled itself. The moon, our moon, the most important astronomical object in the story of life on Earth, is the child of the most violent event in Earth's history, and it gave us gifts we could not have lived without. The moon's gravity stabilizes. Earth's axial tilt, the angle at which Earth is tilted relative to its orbit around the Sun. Without that stabilization, Earth's tilt would vary chaotically over millions of years, swinging from near zero to extreme angles, causing climate changes so dramatic that complex life might never have gotten a stable enough foothold to evolve. The moon drives the tides, and the tidal zones, the areas of shoreline that are alternately wet and dry with each tidal cycle, may have been crucial in the origin of life, concentrating chemicals, driving the rhythmic cycles of chemistry that may have produced the first self-replicating molecules. The catastrophe that made the moon made life possible. First life. Breathe slowly. Let the images come gently. The young Earth, still hot, its sky orange with volcanic gases. Its surface partly molten, the enormous moon hanging close and enormous in the sky. Life appeared on Earth with remarkable speed. The oldest evidence of life chemical traces in ancient rock dates to approximately 4.1 billion years ago. The Earth itself is only 4.5 billion years old. Life appeared within 400 million years of the planet's formation, in a cosmos that is 13.8 billion years old, that is startlingly fast. How? We do not know. The origin of life is one of the greatest unsolved problems in science. We know what life is made of. We know many of the chemical reactions involved. But we do not know, with certainty, how the first self-replicating molecule, the first thing that could make copies of itself, the first thing that could therefore evolve, came into existence. Several environments have been proposed. Deep-sea hydrothermal vents, cracks in the ocean floor where superheated water rich in minerals emerges into the cold deep ocean, creating steep chemical gradients that could drive the synthesis of complex molecules. Warm little ponds on the surface, places where volcanic heat and tidal rhythms and ultraviolet light from the young sun could concentrate chemicals and drive reactions. Ice, the slow concentration of chemicals in freezing water, where the unfrozen fraction becomes an increasingly rich chemical soup. We do not know which of these, if any, was the cradle of life. Perhaps all of them contributed. Perhaps the origin of life happened many times in many places, and only one lineage survived to become the ancestor of everything alive today. But we know that by 3.5 billion years ago, life was clearly established on Earth. Stromatolites layered structures built by mats of photosynthetic bacteria are found in rocks of that age in Australia and South Africa. These simple organisms were already performing one of the most important chemical reactions in Earth's history. They were splitting water molecules using sunlight and releasing the oxygen atoms as a waste product. They were photosynthesizing, and their oxygen waste would, over the next billion years, completely transform the planet. The long patience of life, the oxygen revolution. For the first 2 billion years of life on Earth, the atmosphere contained almost no free oxygen. The chemistry of the early Earth, abundant volcanic gases, iron-rich oceans, consumed oxygen as fast as the early photosynthesizers produced it. But slowly, over hundreds of millions of years, the balance shifted. The iron in the oceans was gradually oxidized, rusted essentially, and sank to the ocean floor as iron oxide. The volcanic gases were slowly overwhelmed by the accumulating output of billions of photosynthetic cells. And then, approximately to 0.4 billion years ago, free oxygen began to accumulate in the atmosphere. For most of the life on Earth at the time, this was a catastrophe. The organisms that had evolved in the oxygen-free world of the early Earth found oxygen toxic. It is, after all, a highly reactive element that destroys biological molecules. Most of the world's organisms were killed or driven into oxygen-free refugia, the deep ocean, the mud, the guts of other organisms. This event is called the Great Oxidation Event. It was, in terms of its impact on life, the greatest mass extinction in Earth's history, far greater than the one that killed the dinosaurs. But from catastrophe, as always, came opportunity. Some organisms had already evolved the ability to use oxygen to combine it with food molecules and extract energy through a process called aerobic respiration. And aerobic respiration is enormously more efficient than the anaerobic alternatives. An organism that can use oxygen to process its food extracts roughly 18 times more energy from the same amount of food as one that cannot. Energy is the currency of life. An organism with 18 times more energy available has almost unlimited advantages over its competitors. The oxygen revolution, catastrophic as it was for the existing life, opened a door to complexity that had been locked before. The cell within the cell. For 2 billion years after the origin of life, the most complex living things on Earth were single cells without nuclei, the bacteria and archaea. Simple cells of extraordinary chemical diversity but limited structural complexity. And then, approximately 2 billion years ago, something happened that changed everything. One bacterium entered another, not as prey, not as a parasite. As our partner. We do not know exactly how it happened, but the evidence in every complex cell on Earth today tells us that it did. Tucked inside every cell with a nucleus, every cell in your body. Every cell in every plant and fungus and animal are small structures called mitochondria, the power plants of the cell. And mitochondria, when you look at their DNA and their biology, are clearly the descendants of bacteria that were engulfed by larger cells and not digested. Instead, they became permanent residents. Partners, the larger cell provided the mitochondria with shelter and raw materials. The mitochondria provided the larger cell with vastly more energy than it could produce on its own. The result, the eukaryotic cell, the cell with a nucleus and mitochondria, was a revolution. A new kind of life with new possibilities. Cells with nuclei could do things that simple cells could not. They could hold more DNA and therefore encode more complexity. They could develop elaborate internal structures. And most importantly, they could stick together, cooperate in ways that eventually produced the first multicellular organisms. For most of Earth's history, life had been invisible. Bacterial mats, chemical films. The ocean teeming with microscopic life, but the visible world bare and empty. That was about to change. The explosion of complexity. For approximately 600 million years ago, the history of life accelerated dramatically. The Cambrian explosion, beginning approximately 541 million years ago, is one of the most dramatic events in the fossil record. In a geologically brief period of perhaps 10 to 25 million years, the major body plans of almost all animal life on Earth appeared. Worms, mollusks, arthropods, the ancestors of insects and crabs and spiders. Echinoderms, the ancestors of starfish and sea urchins. And something particularly important, creatures with a stiffening rod running along their backs. The precursors of the vertebrates. The ancestors, eventually, of fish and amphibians and reptiles and dinosaurs and mammals and us. Why did it happen so fast? The question is debated. Perhaps the evolution of eyes, which appeared in multiple lineages during the Cambrian, triggered an arms race of predator and prey that drove rapid evolutionary innovation. Perhaps the chemistry of the oceans reached a threshold that made calcium carbonate shells and skeletons possible. Perhaps the oxygen content of the atmosphere had finally reached a level that could support the metabolic demands of active, mobile animals. Probably all of these and more. The Cambrian explosion was not, as it is sometimes portrayed, the sudden appearance of life from nothing. Life had been present for 3 billion years before the Cambrian. But it was the moment when life became visible, when it began to build structures large enough to leave fossils. When it began to move and hunt and compete in ways that drove the rapid evolution of new forms. The world went from simple to complex in what was, by geological standards, an eye blink. And once complexity had appeared, it could only grow. From Sea to Land. For most of the history of animal life on Earth, the land was empty. 400 millions of years after the Cambrian explosion, the oceans teemed with life, fish and mollusks and arthropods and echinoderms, evolving and diversifying and competing and cooperating in ecosystems of increasing complexity. But the land was bare rock and ancient soil, with only simple plants and fungi beginning to colonize the edges of things. And then, approximately 375 million years ago, something crawled out of the water. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually over millions of years. A lineage of fish that had already evolved lungs for breathing air in stagnant water, fish that had evolved robust. Limb-like fins for pushing themselves along shallow bottoms began to spend more time out of the water. Tiktaalik, Acanthostiga, Ichthyostiga, Distrans Nex. Fish with primitive limbs. Fish that could do push-ups represent the moment when vertebrate life made its most consequential transition. From water to land. The land offered opportunities that the crowded, competitive ocean could not. Food, the insects and plants that were already colonizing the terrestrial world. Space, the vast open continents, largely empty of predators, waiting to be explored. But it also demanded adaptations. how to breathe in air efficiently, how to support a body without the buoyancy of water, how to prevent desiccation, the drying out that threatens any aquatic organism that leaves the water, how to reproduce away from water. Each of these challenges was met over millions of years by evolutionary innovation, lungs improving, limbs strengthening, skin thickening, and, perhaps the most important innovation of all, the amniotic egg, a self-contained reproductive unit with its own water supply enclosed in a protective membrane that could be laid on land without drying out. The amniotic egg freed vertebrate life from its dependence on water for reproduction. And the lineage that produced its amniotus eventually produced the reptiles, the dinosaurs, the birds, and the mammals. The age of great creatures. C'est dinosaurs. For approximately 165 million years. From about 230 million years ago to 66 million years ago, the land animals of Earth were dominated by the dinosaurs, not the slow, cold-blooded, stupid creatures of old popular imagination. The real dinosaurs were, at least many of them, warm-blooded, fast-moving, socially complex animals. Many had feathers. Some had elaborate crests and frills used for display and communication. They ranged in size from creatures smaller than a chicken to the largest land animals that have ever lived, sauropods-like. Argentinosaurus and Patagotiton, reaching lengths of over 30 meters and weights perhaps exceeding 70 tons. The dinosaurs were successful beyond any easy measure. They occupied every terrestrial ecological niche, herbivores and carnivores. Grazers and browsers, hunters and scavengers, they lived on every continent. They evolved and diversified and adapted for 165 million years. And then, 66 million years ago, their world ended. Not entirely for all time. The birds are dinosaurs, and they are still very much with us. But the non-avian dinosaurs, the great dinosaurs of popular imagination, were killed by a rock from space, the Chicxulub impactor, an asteroid or comet approximately 10 across, struck what is today the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico with an energy estimated at 1 billion times that of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The impact vaporized everything within hundreds of kilometers instantly. The shockwave circled the globe. Earthquakes and tsunamis of unimaginable scale followed. And then the winter. The dust and debris thrown into the atmosphere by the impact blocked the sun for months, perhaps years. Photosynthesis stopped. Plants died. The food chains that depended on plants collapsed. 3/4 of all species on Earth went extinct. The non-avian dinosaurs were among them. And in the ecological space left by their extinction, a small, previously insignificant group of warm-blooded, hairy, mostly nocturnal creatures found its moment. Mammals. The rise of mammals. Mammals had existed for approximately 150 million years before the asteroid hit, but for most of that time they had been small, rat-sized or smaller, mostly nocturnal. living in the shadow of the dinosaurs that dominated every daylight ecological niche. They were not unsuccessful. They were, in fact, quietly brilliant in their niche. Their warm blood allowed them to be active in the cold of night when reptiles were sluggish. Their complex brains, relatively large for their body size, allowed flexible behavior. Their live birth and milk production meant they could invest heavily in each offspring, producing young that were well cared for and had longer learning periods than reptiles. But the dinosaurs kept them small and marginal. It is very difficult to become an elephant when tyrannosaurs are around. When the tyrannosaurs died, the mammals exploded. In the approximately 10 million years following the extinction event, a blink of geological time, mammals diversified into virtually every ecological niche that the dinosaurs had vacated. Large herbivores, large carnivores, burrowers and climbers and swimmers. Eventually, creatures that would take to the air, the bats, and creatures that would return to the sea, the ancestors of whales. The mammalian body plan, refined over 150 million years of nocturnal survival, proved extraordinarily adaptable. The warm blood, the flexible behavior, the intensive parental care, all of these became advantages in a world suddenly open to new possibilities. And somewhere in this explosion of mammalian diversity, a particular lineage was beginning to develop something that would, in time, change the planet more profoundly than the asteroid that had opened the door for mammals in the first place. A very large brain relative to body size, capable of extraordinarily complex behavior, capable, eventually, of looking up at the stars and asking where they came from. So primates. The primate order, the group that includes lemurs and monkeys and apes and humans, evolved from small, tree-dwelling mammals shortly after the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs. The earliest primates were small, large-eyed, insect-eating creatures adapted for life in the trees of the tropical forests that covered much of the early post-Cretaceous world. Their hands had already developed the grasping ability that would prove so crucial, nails instead of claws, sensitive fingertips, opposable thumbs. Their eyes had moved to the front of the face, giving them the binocular, depth-perceiving vision that tree dwellers need to judge distances accurately, and their brains processing the information from those forward-facing eyes, coordinating the complex movements of those grasping hands, were growing. Over the next 60 million years, the primates diversified. New world monkeys in the Americas, Old World monkeys in Africa and Asia, and in Africa. A particular lineage developed that would eventually include the great apes. The apes, the gibbons, the orangutans, the gorillas, the chimpanzees, the bonobos all share a common ancestor. And that ancestor also shares ancestry with us. Approximately 6 to 7 million years ago, in Africa, a lineage of apes began to do something unusual, something that set them apart from their forest-dwelling relatives. They began to walk upright, not because walking upright was obviously superior to moving through trees. It is not for a creature adapted to arboreal life. But the African climate was changing, forests were contracting, grasslands expanding. And on the open savanna, bipedalism offered advantages. It freed the hands for carrying. It raised the eyes above the grass. It was, in certain environments, more energetically efficient for covering long distances. The first hominids, the bipedal apes, the ancestors of the human lineage, were not impressive by any obvious measure. They were small-brained, small-bodied, vulnerable to predators, limited in their range. But they were walking, and their hands were free. And their brains, generation by generation, were growing. The human moment, the long road to us, between the first bipedal hominid 7 million years ago and the appearance of our own species. Homo sapiens, approximately 300,000 years ago. Many different kinds of human-like creatures lived and evolved and went extinct on the African continent and beyond. Australopithecus, the southern apes, the genus that includes the famous Lucy, discovered in Ethiopia in 1974, small-brained but bipedal, living between approximately 4 and 2 million years ago. Homo habilis, the handy human, the first member of our genus, appearing approximately to 0.4 million years ago, associated with the first stone tools. The first being on Earth to make things. Homo erectus, upright human, appearing approximately 1.9 million years ago, larger-brained than habilis. A traveller, Homo erectus, spread out of Africa into Asia and Europe, reaching as far as China and Java, used fire, made more sophisticated tools. And Menioheidegensis, Homo halenisovens. The Neanderthals, the diverse, complex, ultimately mostly extinct branches of the human family tree, each one a being with a life, with family and community and experience, not a stepping stone to something better. A world unto themselves, worth mourning in their passing. And then, 300,000 years ago in Africa, a species appeared that was anatomically modern, that had our skeleton, our skull, our brain capacity. Homo sexuelle sapiens, the wise human, us. We were not immediately dominant. For most of our first 200,000 years, we were one hominid species among several living in Africa, making tools using fire, leaving no obvious sign that we were destined for anything in particular. And then, approximately 70,000 years ago, perhaps triggered by a crisis, perhaps by some internal change in cognitive capacity, perhaps simply by the slow accumulation of cultural innovations reaching a threshold, something shifted. We began to behave differently. The cognitive revolution. Around 70,000 years ago, Homo sapiens began doing things that no other species had ever done, making art, not just tools, but things with no obvious practical function, paintings, sculptures, jewelry, the expression of an inner life through physical form, using symbolsmarks and images that stood for things they were not. This is a profound cognitive leap. To use a symbol, you must be able to hold two things in mind simultaneously, the symbol and what it represents, and understand the relationship between them. This is the foundation of language, of mathematics, of everything. Planning for the distant future, catching food, planning migrations, building structures designed to last, thinking about next year, not just tomorrow, and cooperating with strangers. Humans from different families and clans beginning to cooperate, to trade, to share information, to maintain social bonds with people they had never met and might never meet again. The extended social networks that this made possible allowed cultural innovations to spread rapidly and accumulate, faster than any previous species could manage. This is the revolution that changed everything. Not a biological revolution, our bodies were essentially the same as they had been for hundreds of thousands of years. A cognitive revolution, a social revolution. The emergence of fully modern human behavior. And once it began, it could not be stopped. Modern humans spread out of Africa approximately 60,000 years ago. Within 20,000 years, they had reached Australia, crossing open ocean to do so. A feat that required boats and navigation and planning of a sophistication no previous species had managed. Within 30,000 years, they had reached the Americas. Within 40,000 years, they occupied every habitable continent on Earth. Everywhere they went, the large animals went extinct. The woolly mammoths, the giant ground sloths, the cave bears. The diprotodons of Australia all gone within centuries of the arrival of modern humans. The most effective large predator the Earth had ever produced had arrived. From camps to cities, and then, approximately 12,000 years ago, something changed again. The end of the last ice age, the warming of the climate. The expansion of productive grasslands in the Middle East and elsewhere. Agriculture, the deliberate cultivation of plants and the herding of animals, not something that happened suddenly, in a single invention, but gradually, in multiple places, over thousands of years, wild grasses becoming domesticated wheat and barley, wild aurochs becoming cattle, wild boars becoming pigs. Agriculture allowed, forced, really, a new way of living. You could not follow the animals and the seasons when you had fields to tend. You stayed. And when you stayed, you could accumulate, build permanent structures, store food against lean seasons. Support specialists, people who made pots or wove cloth or kept records who were not themselves growing food. And from that accumulation, from that specialization, from that density of people living close together over long periods of time, cities, writing, mathematics, law, religion in its organized forms, science, the entire edifice of human civilization, built in the last 12,000 years, an eye blink in the history of the universe. A heartbeat in the history of life on Earth out of the decision or the discovery or the slow drift of circumstance. That settled life was possible. That you could stay. Tonight. The universe right now. The universe is 13.8 billion years old. In that time, it has expanded from a point smaller than a proton to something so vast that light, traveling at the maximum possible speed, cannot cross it in any time comparable to its age. The observable universe, the part we can see, is approximately 93 billion light-years across. The full universe may be infinite. It contains somewhere between 1 and 2 trillion galaxies. Each galaxy contains, on average, hundreds of billions of stars. The total number of stars in the observable universe is approximately 10 to the power of 24, a 1 followed by 24 zeros. And around many of those stars, planets. We now know, from the Kepler Space Telescope and its successors, that planets are not rare. They are the rule. Most stars have planets. Many of those planets are rocky, in the right temperature range for liquid water. The universe is full of potential homes for life. Any of do not know. We have found no evidence of life beyond Earth, but the numbers are so vast that it seems improbable, not impossible. But improbable that Earth is the only place where life has appeared. Somewhere out there, perhaps around another ordinary star in another ordinary galaxy, chemistry has organized itself into something that can grow and reproduce and evolve. Something that has, over billions of years of patient iteration, become complex. Something that can look up at the night sky and wonder. Or perhaps not. Perhaps life on Earth is the extraordinary exception, the one place in an unimaginably vast universe where the right conditions aligned. At the right moment and produced something that could ask questions about itself. Either way, whether we are alone or one of countless inhabited worlds, the fact of our existence is staggering. You, at the end of 14 billion years. Let me bring this all the way home. To you, right now, you are the universe looking at itself. Every atom in your body was forged in the heart of a star. The carbon that forms your DNA, the oxygen in your lungs, the iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones. All of it was created in stellar nucleosynthesis, scattered by stellar explosions, gathered into the nebula that became the solar system, incorporated into the Earth, cycled through billions of years of geology and ocean chemistry and biological metabolism, and ultimately assembled by the most complex process in the known universe into you. You are 13.8 billion years old, in a sense. You are made of the oldest matter there is. Your brain, the 3 pounds of extraordinarily organized matter sitting in your skull right now, is the most complex object we have found anywhere in the universe. More than 80 billion neurons, each connected to thousands of others, forming a network of perhaps 100 trillion connections. Processing the world. Generating consciousness. Experiencing time and beauty and love and grief and curiosity and wonder. The universe spent 13.8 billion years producing something capable of wondering about itself, and then it produced you. And tonight, you are lying here, warm and quiet. Your 13.8 billion-year-old atoms arranged in this particular, irreplaceable configuration at the end of the longest story ever told. From nothing to everything, from the first quarks to the first stars to the first cells to the first thoughts to you. Here, now, breathing slowly in the dark. I'll offset to get to this. The night sky above you. If you could see through your ceiling tonight, if the walls and the roof and the clouds and the light pollution could all be stripped away, you would see a sky blazing with stars. Every star you could see is a sun. Some of them larger than ours, some smaller, some with planets. Some of those planets perhaps warm and wet, perhaps alive. The light reaching your eyes from the nearest star, Proxima Centauri. For point to light years away left that star for 0.2 years ago. You are seeing it as it was for 0.2 years in the past. The light from the Andromeda Galaxy, the nearest large galaxy to ours. Just barely visible to the naked eye on a clear dark night as a faint smudge left that galaxy to 0.5 million years ago. When that light began its journey to your eyes, our ancestors were Homo habilis making their first stone tools in Africa. And the farthest thing you can see with the naked eye, the Triangulum Galaxy. On a very clear night, its light has been traveling for 3 million years to reach you. You are looking into the past. Every time you look at the night sky, you are doing history, ancient history. The kind of history that makes all other history look like yesterday. And the universe is looking back through you. The cosmos has produced in you a pair of eyes that can look at it, and a mind that can understand what it sees, and a heart that can be moved by the beauty of it. That is perhaps the most extraordinary thing of all. Let the universe settle in you now, gently, like the cosmic microwave background radiation, the afterglow of the Big Bang. Itself still present everywhere, the universe's own background hum, settling into the fabric of space. You are made of stars. This is not poetry. IT is physics. You are the end of a chain of causes stretching back 13.8 billion years. Every event in the history of the universe was necessary to produce you exactly as you are. Here, tonight. The precise collision that made the moon. The exact asteroid that ended the dinosaurs. The specific mutation that gave your ancestors an extra fold in their brain cortex. All of it required to produce this. Oh, let your breathing slow. Let your body sink. Let the weight of 13.8 billion years of cosmic history rest lightly on you, not as a burden, but as a context. The vast, patient, extraordinary context of your existence. The stars are burning tonight, as they always are. The galaxies are moving, as they always are, carried by the expansion of space that began in the first second of everything. The cosmic microwave background fills the universe with its ancient warmth. And you are here, warm and quiet and made of the oldest matter in existence, arranged in the most complex pattern in the known universe at the end of the longest story ever told. The universe made you so it could know itself. Rest now. You have earned it. All 13.8 billion years of you. Let the stars burn. Let the galaxies turn. Let the ancient light travel its ancient distances. And let yourself sleep. The universe will still be here when you wake.